regardless, as always. And we're back to share our thoughts and reactions to week 16 of the NFL season. Had some pretty good games, had some surprises. As always, the NFL, the script never fails. And we're about to dive into that. Bad week, really, for both of us in different ways. You had a couple, record-wise, was not great for you. But
Yeah.
unfortunately for me, and even at the time, I was like, when I was mentioning my pick about putting all my money on San Francisco, my thoughts, doubt started crept in a little bit. But at that point, got to dig in. I made my pick, and then of course we'll talk about that game later. Did not go well. I was not the only one though with taking my face, as Lamar publicly called out Mike Florio, or called him Mike Flores.
Yeah, I saw that.
So that was pretty funny. I haven't heard Flores' response, but I'm sure he took it in stride. Anyhow, well, maybe not knowing him. Regardless, we're back and be sharing some thoughts on the games. Of course, let's start out with the Thursday night game, which felt like forever ago because now all these games, there's like 4 different days of football. So hopefully everyone enjoyed that. It was a little bit disorienting for me, but I was fine with it. Just a little weird because sometimes I forgot there were games. I'm not gonna lie, I forgot about the Saturday night game. No offense to Peacock there. But regardless, we're talking about Thursday night first. It was the LA Rams. They took care of business as they're still. This is a crucial game we mentioned in the breakdown because beforehand, both teams, fighting for that wild card spot. I know the Saints are still fighting for their division, so that was even more important for them. But the Rams are the ones that prevailed, 30-22. And to be honest, felt like the Rams controlled most of this game, as 22. This last 2 touchdowns were kind of late, anyhow. But nonetheless, any thoughts here in regards to the Rams prevailing, John?
Well, this is a big win for the Rams because obviously they're still fighting for the wild card spot, and one of the competition they have is the Saints. So this is good for them because it puts them over the top of the Saints, and potential tiebreaker scenarios also puts them over the top, which also would require the Saints to be the second place team in the NFC South, which is unlikely, but still, just in case, this is a big win, especially considering the rest of their schedule. They do play the Giants this next week, which, the Giants have been competitive, so it's not like a gimme, but then they play the Niners to end the season. And so had they lost this game, that game against the Niners would have been really daunting. It still might be, but it could have been a must-win scenario. So getting the win this week, I think, was really big for the Rams. And, they're just continuing their hot streak. Like, I think, what is it? They've won 5 out of their last 6, the only loss being to the Ravens. So they've been looking really good.
Yeah, we mentioned it. Kyron Williams has been a big factor, just giving them balance. I think also credit to the offensive line, too, as well. They've been better, obviously, creating holes in the run game, protecting Stafford with that balance. Now that they're, it's not just dropping back every play, Matthew Stafford, save us. And on the flip side, for the Saints, just another day where I hear Shannon Sharp always criticize your quarterback, Dak. Oh, Dak loves his empty calories, even though that's usually not warranted. But if there's a quarterback that we should be criticizing for empty stats, garbage stats. No offense, Derek Carr, but it's Derek Carr. They did nothing for the first 3 quarters, and then finally, when the defense is chilling, all right, we're letting the Saints. We're up 30-7. Then 12 play, 75-yard drive took some effort even at the end, and then they did get one more touchdown, but that was set up with good field position from there. So for the Saints, just we got a good feeling in regards. Okay, Rams are for a real playoff team. It's looking like, well, Saints, we'll see if they make it in there, but it's like one of those where we'll keep a side eye on them, and I don't think many outside of New Orleans are very confident. Even bet you people in New Orleans have their doubts in regards to this team if they do somehow make it in going far. But obviously, they're still in contention for their division, although we'll talk about that later. But Rams taking care of business and further, like you mentioned, kind of making it easier to control their own destiny going forward. And such. So good win for them as they're red hot, and I don't think he's going to win it, obviously, but I think he deserves to be in the conversation, at least for me, which would be, hey, Matthew Stafford, like, he's been amazing for them thus far, very quietly. I know that's been a lot of the factors for LA Rams, but once again, he's putting together another great year. I know he's got Puka Nacua and such, so people are going to try to use that to diminish it, but Stafford's been playing great. Big reason why they are this far and with in regards to the season. But That was
Which, speaking of Puka, by the way, do you think that maybe he wins Rookie of the Year since Stroud has been injured recently?
yeah, unless
Because it felt
unless
like it was a runaway Stroud,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, the only I would say he's a front runner now, in my opinion. Stroud second, like unless Stroud pops off like these last two games, and maybe Puka slows down, which doesn't seem like that's going to be too. Like Stroud needs help in regards to
yeah,
like Puka needs to kind of have a quote unquote couple of pedestrian performances, and Stroud has to really
right,
come popping off. Who knows? Because that concussion seemed more serious than it initially was for Stroud, as he obviously missed two games. But yeah,
right.
no, it's a great assessment, and I I forget the odds, but I know that man, for those that did put in the maybe put in a bet on Puka early in the season, they're probably looking pretty good right now to be Rookie of the Year. So, uh,
I mean, just I want to say real quick
there you
before we move on too. I saw this the other day and I was kind of shocked, but Kyron Williams is second in the league in total rushing yards,
and he missed
which is
like
kind of
what,
crazy.
5 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks too.
Yeah. And the only guy above him is Christian McCaffrey, which McCaffrey has like a massive lead by like over 300 yards. He's at 1,400 right now, to where Kyron is second with 1,057, which is just, I don't know, it's just kind of crazy. Like, even when you read out the current leaders of the top five, McCaffrey, Kyron Williams, James Cook, Raheem Mostert, and DeAndre Swift, who would have guessed like that's the five? I don't know. It's kind of wild that Kyron missed that many games and he's that high up. So shout out to the Rams playmakers because they're balling out.
And only I want to add on to that one more point too is like most of those guys, like even McCaffrey, like they had, I mean, Kyrie Williams last year with the injury concerns. Most of them had injury concerns, even DeAndre Swift and even
Yeah.
Raheem Mostert. So it just goes to show a
Yeah.
little bit how injuries can be a little fluky. It's really hard to predict. But yeah, credit to really all those guys for turning the narrative around, even James Cook. And obviously, we'll talk more about them later. But yeah, Rams got it rolling, and kudos to their just the entire team, top to bottom, front. So we'll see if they can keep making the improbable push, not improbable, but probable push to the playoffs here. But let's move on over to the AFC, where some division rivals are jockeying for playoff position, and it was the Pittsburgh Steelers, led by Mason Rudolph at quarterback. They get the big win over the Cincinnati Bengals here, 34-11. It was oddly a explosive offensive performance for the Steelers, and who would have thought, especially with once again Mason Rudolph filling in. But what were your thoughts here, John, in regards to your boy George Pickens showing out?
I mean, good for him. 8-7 too. Like, this was a big win for the Steelers because the Bengals were obviously also in the potential race for the wild card spot. So it keeps the dream alive. It also makes it that much more likely that they will finish with a record 500 or better. So maybe the streak stays alive too. I don't know the Steelers' schedule the rest of the way. They play Seahawks, Ravens. So
Not easy.
it'll be tough, but I mean, they if they lost this Bengals game, it probably would have been impossible. So it's a good win for the Steelers. It keeps their hopes alive for a variety of things, and they proved me wrong because I really thought that going with Mason Rudolph was not really that great of a decision. But considering they put up 34 points, I mean, I can't really complain.
Yeah. We also saw here in regards to the other side, Bengals offense kind of come back to earth. Jake Browning. Once again, we see why Jake Browning is a backup. Some dicey decisions. And obviously that helped Pittsburgh out. And once again, like we mentioned with Pittsburgh, I mean, no turnovers for them as opposed to obviously creating, three on the opposite side. And yeah, for also last point, the Bengals, I know this Pittsburgh offense has been struggling, but once you get beat by a couple George Pickens bombs, once again, hindsight, you may want to throw a safety over him. I don't know. It's just, it seemed like every critical situation, I know like they went to Pickens and it worked out pretty well, especially on critical third downs. It's just one-on-one. Is Pickens one-on-one? Oh, he is? Okay, I'm just going to lob it up to him. And as we saw, he's going to make plays. And yeah, he definitely quieted his critics there, especially in regards to all that leading up to the game beforehand. And yeah, we'll see how these Pittsburgh, if they can somehow wrangle their way in. And before I move on to last point, I'm sure all the cries and thoughts of should we let go of Mike Tomlin have quieted down very quickly, even though they weren't really valid in the first place. And at least in my opinion, I'm sure you feel the same way in regards to that, because many for if they were to let go of Mike Tomlin at the end of the season. As we've said before, there's going to be a long list of teams that are going to be giving him a call to bring him in. So
Yeah,
a little bit.
I think he would get hired probably the day he got fired.
Yes, he would be
if he wanted to. I mean, he could take his time, but
yeah, he would be offered to be interviewed that day of. Like, hey, Mike, fly. We'll send a private jet. Like, come on over. We'll let's get you in here. Anyway, but for now, still with the Steelers, and like you mentioned, his amazing streak is still alive and well as Pittsburgh's playoff hopes and dreams. So as we mentioned, Steelers handled their business there. Buffalo here. This one will be relatively quick as the Bills did handle their business, although it was quite scary. Came down to the wire as the Bills beat the Chargers 24-22. Any thoughts here, John?
I mean, it was a crucial win for Buffalo. They needed it. I wasn't super impressed with the performance overall. Like, the Chargers kept it close. Honestly, I thought the Chargers were going to win the game, but that final drive, they just weren't able to stick around in field goal range to where they could make it. I mean, it was a 65-yarder. If it was the other Texas kicker, then maybe they get it. But at the same time, for the Chargers, I don't know. What do we expect? Like, they're the Chargers, so the only thing I'm surprised about is that they really kept this one close. But other than that, I mean, like, Buffalo did what they needed to do. It wasn't pretty, but you're 9-6, and that's what matters.
Yeah, all on point out. Buffalo 3 turnovers that really helped the Chargers. Literally all turnovers led to points. And so Buffalo put themselves behind the 8 ball for the most part. But luckily, like you mentioned, they prevailed. Gabe Davis. It was a Gabe Davis game too, so that helps. Although the trend going forward shows that he may not. There's going to be a game where he lays a goose egg. 'Cause I saw that too recently, where it's like he either goes for 0 yards or he goes off. It's either or.
Yeah.
You get no real in between for them. But yeah, Buffalo handles their business against the Chargers and keeps their playoff hopes alive as they're also in that wild card race. So those are the Saturday games. Let's move on over to the Sunday games, starting with the Detroit Lions. They get a huge win over the Minnesota Vikings, 30-24, but huge in the fact, first division title since 1993. I'm sure everyone's heard and seen it. But what are your thoughts here in regards to the game, John?
I mean, congrats to Detroit, the fans that have stuck around for so long. I know that I saw a lot of Detroit fans this was a big moment for them. So I say that because what I'm about to say afterwards might feel a little insulting, but I don't think it was that impressive of a win. I mean, like, Nick Mullins threw 4 interceptions and you won by 6. Like, you won the turnover battle huge. Like, Detroit only allowed 1 sack. Minnesota allowed 4. Detroit was 50% on third down. Minnesota was 33% on third down. Detroit was also 2 of 2 on fourth. Minnesota didn't convert fourth. Like, all these stats indicate like Detroit should have crushed them, and yet they didn't. So it just goes to show that, like, they weren't really fully taking advantage of their opportunities. They had double the time of possession, all these crazy things. And once again, they only won by 6. So it felt like the result should have been a way bigger win. But once again, just like the Buffalo one, you got the win. You won the division. That's really what matters. I don't want to take away from the Detroit fans and their happiness in what they have accomplished, because it is an accomplishment considering the history of this team. So congrats to Detroit for winning the division. And now they got all eyes set towards the playoffs and maybe even the first seed, because the first seed is not actually clinched by the Niners yet after their loss. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, congrats to Detroit.
Yeah, congrats, kudos to them. We have a Detroit fan and all the pain they've been through, and obviously me being a Packer fan, I know a lot. I know they've been in pain, partially because we've inflicted that. Also,
For a long time.
Yeah, we've been a good reason for that. Yeah, you mentioned though the 4 interceptions and the fact that it was still close. I think that's the big thing for Detroit going forward. Is still the big question is their pass defense. I know that once again they had 4 interceptions, but most of those are just poor decisions by Nick Mullins. I mean, Nick Mullins still threw for 400 yards on Detroit, and that was losing. They lost Jordan Addison early, and then obviously they lost DJ Hawkinson, and they still have Justin Jefferson. But once again, this is Nick Mullins. Like, you're going to play better quality quarterbacks going in the playoffs and such, and probably better and more balanced offenses as well. Because the Vikings, I mean, they couldn't run the ball. They basically gave up at some point because they only Ty Chandler 8 attempts, 17 yards, and that was pretty much it. Like, and once again, why would they? They were dicing the Lions whenever they weren't throwing interceptions through the air.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's going to be a major concern for the Lions. As we've noted before going forward, but good to see. Seems like Jahmyr Gibbs, I know not touch wise, but it seems like he is kind of the alpha, at least in regards to explosive plays. He just looks better than David Montgomery.
Yeah.
I mean, David Montgomery's still really good. I understand why they're splitting time. Montgomery's more of the short yardage, kind of preserving Jahmyr, a lot like we mentioned before, like how Dallas did it the past couple of years with Zeke and Pollard, where it's just you want to keep your more explosive back more fresh for critical moments and such. But yeah, we'll see if the Lions keep trucking along and like you mentioned, maybe snag that first seed on top of getting that long-awaited division title for them, and obviously their first playoff win, because I know they haven't done that in a while either. But one thing at a time, they get their division title here, so kudos to them. But let's move on over to another team in the NFC in the wild card race, and it's the Seattle Seahawks, as they almost messed around here and for another week in a row, but they figured it out just like last week as they beat the Tennessee Titans 20-17. They love them. Some last minute comebacks, the Seahawks. What were your thoughts here, John?
Well, I mean, losing would have just been really bad here, because we've talked about the Seahawks and at length in the past few weeks, and their schedule, and like the win against the Eagles was so huge. But I mean, after Tennessee, like this felt like one of the more easier games. Then they have to go play Pittsburgh and Arizona. Arizona at the end of the year, final game, who knows? But I don't know. This was a big result for them, because when you look at the NFC standings, they currently are in the wild card spot. One of the two NFC East teams, Eagles or Cowboys, are going to take that 5th seed. Then you got the Rams, and with the tiebreaker over Seattle, mind you, and then the Seahawks as the other two wildcard teams. And it was big because the Vikings, the Packers, the Falcons, the Saints, all these teams now sit at 7 and 8. And so it just gives them a little bit more breathing room. I don't know all the tiebreaker scenarios, but they don't have to go through one of those right now because of all the results. So this was a very crucial win, because you don't want to be in the pack with all those 7 and 8 teams, where it becomes a much more must-win scenario for them. So, yeah, I thought that was a big result for Seattle. They showed resilience. Once again, it wasn't pretty, but that's kind of the theme of this week. When you get towards the end, you just got to win.
You just got to win. You got to get there healthy, too. This would be another benefit. So good for them. Yeah, it's typical Seattle, like we mentioned, where they just kind of play to their opponent at times because they're so reliant upon their playmakers making plays on both sides of the ball. Kudos to the Tennessee not turning the ball over. It was a very Tennessee-esque game where, hey, we're going to run the ball and we're going to control clock. And, hey, they won time possession, so it was going their way. They threw the kitchen sink with another Derrick Henry touchdown throw. And nonetheless, this shows the Titans like they're good, but not good enough yet, as we've seen, because once again, their pass game was irrelevant for the most part. Not much explosive plays there, and you need that in the league nowadays. So Seahawks, like you mentioned, take care of business, have some cushion, have some breathing room going into this playoff race. As of right now, they are, like you mentioned, 8-7, so they are in at the moment. So they, as of going forward, they technically do control their own destiny as long as they take care of business on their end. So not much more on that. Let's move on over to Cleveland. The Browns put just an explosive performance up against the Houston Texans, 36-22. Granted, it was Davis Mills / Case Keenum, as Keenum was, I'm not sure if he got injured or pulled. I'm assuming he got pulled because he got pulled. Yeah, he had 2 interceptions. Not a great day in the office for him. While Joe Flacco is still just letting it fly, for better or for worse, because he threw 2 picks this game. But what were your thoughts here, John?
I mean, the Browns, it's such an interesting spot, because like their defense is so good that I think that like Joe Flacco he's been throwing a lot of interceptions, but like I kind of feel like he's okay with that. Like he knows he can throw a lot of risky passes purely because of how good the defense is. And it's a good spot to be in if you're a quarterback, because he's a backup. I'd say this a lot. Like, it doesn't really matter how you win as a backup as long as you can do enough to win. And so we're seeing like the Browns offense is really explosive. Like the Amari Cooper plays that have been happening the last few weeks, David Njoku stuff that's been happening the last couple weeks. Like, this passing attack has kind of taken over, which is so interesting because we've thought about Cleveland as such a run first heavy team for so long. And the run game in this game was completely irrelevant. Like, Jerome Ford averaged under 2 yards a carry. So there was basically no run game. And the passing game was the whole reason, they put up so many points. And, the defense on the other side was getting on the ball back. So Cleveland's just a really interesting team right now, especially heading into the playoffs, because they're still in the mix for not only the AFC North division title, but the 1 seed, depending on what happens. Now, they need some help. They don't control their destiny in either of those regards, but I mean, like, it's possible. And do they hold the tiebreaker over the Ravens? I know they beat them once. I don't know if they beat them both times.
I don't believe so.
No, they don't. Well, I don't know the tiebreaker. They tied 1-1. I don't know the tiebreakers after that. I'm not going to go too far into it because I'm sure it could get wild. But regardless, I mean, the Browns, the fact that, like, considering the circumstances of what has happened during their season, having to go through like multiple different quarterbacks, multiple different backup quarterbacks, mind you, signing Joe Flacco, like all these crazy things, and they're sitting at 10-5. Really impressive season for them, and this game was just kind of it kind of told the story of the season where they've kind of found their offensive identity behind Joe Flacco, and the defense is continuing to hold strong.
Yeah, I want to add to in regards to that. Also, offensive line injury, especially at tackle, lost Jack Conklin early in the season. Jedrick Wills as well. They lost him, a couple weeks ago, and then even the backup to Conklin, DeJuan Jones, the rookie, was playing pretty solidly too. He also out for the rest of the season very recently too, and I think that will be a concern maybe going forward, or at least going to the playoffs for Cleveland. Is like you mentioned, it's weird to say this, but their run game has not been as effective the past few weeks. But granted, Joe Flacco's willing to fly, so we'll see if teams maybe adjust and then the run game, can find its way again. But yeah, like you mentioned, Bever worse, Flacco is force feeding Amari Cooper and David Njoku, so he can't argue with the results. So, yeah, Browns get the big win over the Texans. Like I mentioned, the Texans, hopefully they get back Stroud and they can get back on track because they've had, they won against Tennessee, but they've had a rough couple of weeks in regards to just offensive performances. So we'll see if they can bounce back. But let's move on over to the Atlanta Falcons, who got a pretty big and convincing win over the Indianapolis Colts, 29-10. Your thoughts here, John?
I was a little bit disappointed in the Colts, not gonna lie. I really thought that they came out really flat in a game that mattered a lot. I mean, because of the wild card race in the AFC, things are heating up. Now, luckily for them, some of the results did kind of go their way. Teams like Houston losing, like that was pretty big. Jacksonville, we'll talk about them later. So they're in the mix for the AFC South, but this felt like a game where if they won, they take control of the AFC South and they hold their own destiny moving forward. So it really just feels like they blew an opportunity against a team like the Falcons, who are kind of just inconsistent, iffy, another quarterback change, like a lot of things going there. So yeah, and I really thought the Colts were actually going to show out huge too, because when they started the game, like I think it was their first drive that they got that Jonathan Taylor touchdown, and they were moving the ball easily, but Atlanta's defense stepped up big the rest of the way. So really big win for Atlanta because it put them in the midst of all those 7 and 8 teams that we talked about earlier. And for Indianapolis, like I said, blown opportunity. So both teams it felt like they were going in opposite directions here. Both needed the big win, and Atlanta came out on top.
Yeah, Indianapolis lost an opportunity to be ahead because they're still in technically the 7th seed, but now technically in the AFC they're still, once again, you lose that cushion. Excuse my phone. You lose that cushion of having the extra game now and leaving it up to tiebreakers and etc. with Houston, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati all chasing right behind them of the Colts. And the only thing I want to mention too is you definitely felt the loss of Michael Pittman because receiving wise it was tough sledding. Like no one was really getting open for the Colts, It seemed like after that first drive, Atlanta was like, okay, let's just take away the run game, see what they can do. And as we saw, not much. And yeah, Taylor Heineke, it's not amazing, but you see when they have a competent passing attack, and especially a quarterback that's not going to, and I'm sorry, Desmond, but not make dumb decisions and make terrible, turnovers. You see, hey, in their running attack a little more efficient, not like eye popping, but we more efficient numbers than we've seen in recently, and even Pitts in London, not amazing games, but hey, they contributed, and Kyle Pitts found the end zone, so that's all you can ask for from Arthur Smith. I know that's what many have been asking for, so we'll see if they can keep building on that as they get the big win over the Colts to make things more confusing in both conferences for the playoff race. And now let's move on over. The next one will also be short and sweet. Two teams that are not in the playoffs, but they gave us a little bit of a game in some sorts. Well, it's like a tale of two halves, though. As the New York Jets get the win 30-28 over the Washington Commanders. Sam Howell benched here. We talk about, benching quarterbacks. He got benched. Jacoby Brissett came in. What were your thoughts here in regards to the Jets winning?
The Jets almost blew it. They had a big lead. They allowed Washington kind of back into it. So the fact that they were able to come out the win is good, because I really thought they were about to be put on one of those highlight reels of like biggest jokes, But they got the win, and like you said, I mean, these two teams are out of the playoffs, so the result really doesn't matter. But I do think the Jacoby Brissett entrance into the game is notable for the fact that Washington is one of those teams that, like, in the draft maybe goes after a quarterback. Like, it's not really set in stone at 4-11. I mean, they're in the top 10. Who knows if they continue to lose out? Other teams kind of around them, like the Patriots, have kind of started to win. So this game felt like a indicator. Hey, maybe we're looking towards the future. Chris Rodriguez getting involved. We bring in Jacoby Brissett to be like, all right, maybe this signifies we're done with Sam Howell. I don't know. It just felt like a game where we could look back on this game last year and be like, yep, that was the moment we realized that, like, Washington was going to just kind of scrap a lot of what was going on and shift towards a lot of new things. So we'll see. But for Sam Howell, I mean, he's in a situation sort of like Justin Fields where, who knows, the team might draft your replacement. So this result is not good at the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, days seem numbered for Ron Rivera and the gang, or at least Ron Rivera as head coach. It feels like, who knows, it's Washington, they could surprise us. But yeah, not much to add here other than Jets just force feeding their playmakers, Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, especially in the passing game too, for both of them. Breece Hall 16 targets, Garrett Wilson 15. I showed you the picture. Luckily, it didn't matter in that league, even if I had put in Breece Hall. But like, if you're like me, Breece had, especially without Zach Wilson, had some rough weeks. So I benched him in one league and paid the prices. He had amazing games. So good to see that A, he's producing late in the season, and B, that they're confident in giving him this workload, coming off that ACL. I know he's been playing for most of the year, but good to see that going to the end of the year. Hopefully he can keep that momentum going to next year. And, I'm sure we'll talk a lot of Jets in the offseason as their quarterback is Aaron Rodgers, of course. But yeah, we'll see what happens with Washington, and for them going forward, as of right now, like John mentioned, top 5, at least looking like they're going to be in the top 5 of the draft. So they may be in position to get Sam Howell's replacement or build upon the team further. We'll see what they decide later in March, April, whenever the draft is. But let's move on over to my game. Also very short and sweet, although Packers, the result wasn't that way, because very competitive game. Packers win 33-30. Carolina had a chance last drive. They just didn't get the spike off in time for a field goal opportunity. But, and I'll just go real quick on this. Odd too, because we got Jair Alexander back and Eric Stokes. I'm a little bit chalking that up to having played football in about 6 weeks plus. For this year, I don't think Stokes has played at all this year, so that maybe led to it. And I do want to give credit to Bryce Young. I think this was easily the best. I know numbers wise, probably is the best performance he had, but even just you look you look at the film and you see he's a lot more decisive in his decision making and his throwing too, and also just getting out of the pocket, things like that. So that's good to see for them, and for my Packers, still concerning considering. Yeah, we got our two corners back and didn't look. We allowed 30 points to the Panthers. Like that's still not great. But any thoughts here on your end?
Not really. I mean, the one notable thing is that you're in the mix of those 7 and 8 teams. So you guys don't control your own destiny, but it keeps you in that spot where who knows? Packers could be making a playoff run. I don't want to give you too much hope though.
Yeah, we'll see because Jair's already we self-suspended him in the next game.
Yeah.
So, apparently over some coin toss things. Once again, I don't know what's going on. So anyhow, Packers take care of business, like John mentioned, and are still in that mix, hopefully for a playoff spot. And we'll see if how the chips fall there. One of those teams, though, within that NFC wild card race is the Tampa Bay Bucks, and they're just on fire. And they just keep rolling as they beat the Jacksonville Jaguars pretty convincingly, 30-12. It was 30-0 basically, and then 2 touchdowns late. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence got knocked out of this one, but still not a great performance. Any thoughts here, John?
I mean, the Jaguars, man, like it's getting real dire over there in Jacksonville. We talked about the Houston and Indianapolis results. Now there's a 3-way tie with them. I think Jacksonville still controls the tiebreaker, but they've lost 4 straight. Like it's getting ugly. Their point differential is now negative. If this team does somehow, by a miracle, win this division, it feels like they're going to get upset first round. I mean, maybe they can turn it around in these final 2 games, but I don't know. The run game has been inefficient, and also the opponents they play the final 2 games are the Panthers and Titans. So, like, those feel like they should be gimmies, but the way they've been playing, man, like, I don't know. So, well, if they make the playoffs, like I said, it feels like they're going to be a team that gets upset because the run game has been super inefficient. And once again, I don't know if this is an ETN issue. I don't know if this is a play calling issue. I don't know if this is a offensive line issue or what, but it's been like this the whole year. And I kind of expected it to get figured out at some point, but it reached like an all-time low this week because they just had to stop running the ball completely. And then Trevor Lawrence, I mean, he's been turning the ball over a lot this year. He's dealing with injuries. I don't know. The Jags are just kind of a mess right now, and Tampa's looking like the opposite, where it feels like they're sort of finding their stride, especially offensively, where Baker is, building chemistry with Mike Evans, with Chris Godwin, who's started to turn it on as well. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to really feel about Jacksonville, and for Tampa, I mean, they could be hosting a playoff game.
Yeah, Tampa's got rolling, and it's a good defensive performance too. Because going into this, at least I was concerned about their defense. They got torched a couple of times. And like we mentioned, there's a lot of talent there. So the talent wasn't equaling the production, but we saw that here. And yeah, for Jacksonville, I think it's just, I feel one of the concerns going into the season for me was offensive line, especially tackles. Juwan Taylor left, and then Cam Robinson was going to miss time due to suspension, and now he's missed time due to injury too. And not all rookies are going to come in and ball out right away. Anton Harrison has had some rough times, and he was also left for this game. So left the game against the Bucks with the back issue. So now you're down to your second/third string guys against a really good Bucks front four. So it just doesn't seem like a good recipe for Jacksonville going forward. And Trevor Lawrence, how dinged up he is just all around. And I mentioned before, Doug Peterson's also relatively simplistic. Just all these not great formula on top of the fact that, yeah, like you mentioned, Bucks are just clicking right now. Run game may not be going great, but we'll say they're patient with it. They still make you respect it in terms of they will still try to run the ball. But yeah, Baker playing some of his best ball right now that he probably ever has. Granted, he does have really good receivers, and he's capitalizing off that, like you mentioned, with Evans and now recently Chris Godwin, and have gotten Rashad White heavily involved in the pass game as well, which has helped kind of diversify their offense. So yeah, Bucks getting that big win and further bolstering their standing within the division, and of course the wild card race in the NFC. So kudos to them for handling their business. Now to move on over to your game, as it was the Miami Dolphins getting that late field goal, or was it last second? Yeah, last second field goal to beat the Dallas Cowboys 22-20. Exciting game. Not as explosive offensively as some may have hoped, but nonetheless a good one. What were your thoughts here, John, in regards to this game?
I felt like Dallas played this one well in terms of limiting the big plays from Tyreek, from Jalen Waddle. Obviously, Jalen Waddle, I mean, he got hurt. I think he has a high ankle sprain, so he didn't play the whole game, but he really only had like that one big catch in the first half. But at the same time, the limiting of the big plays, this was like the first game where they really ran a lot of zone defense too, and it was specifically to try and stop this kind of stuff. It allowed for a lot of sort of middle and intermediate stuff with Tyreek, Durham Smythe as well. Shout out my brother-in-law's best man. But he had his best game, I think, of the year, 5 catches, 56 yards. He's, typically not as involved in the receiving game, but because Dallas is playing zone and just leaving so much stuff open over the middle, that was kind of the sacrifice that had to be made. And I thought the defensive game plan was sound. Like the fact that they were able to limit Miami to 22 points at home and prevent Tyreek from making that massive an impact. I mean, like you look at the stats, 9 catches for 99 yards is obviously like big, but he didn't have any like huge, like, oh my gosh, like game shifting moments where he like scored a touchdown kind of thing. So he was certainly helping them move the ball down the field. But I think they did a good job at like limiting him, and they also did a good job in the red zone. It was just the mistakes, man. Like Dallas made a lot of mistakes. That obviously Tony Pollard on the first drive, he could have just gone to the outside. He doesn't. He tries to cut inside, gets like completely flipped. Great tackle by Deshaun Elliott. He doesn't get in the end zone on the one, so then they try to hand it off to the fullback. That's a fumble. Don't know why we don't just like rip it out of the Eagles book and just run the QB sneak. Like I really don't understand that. And for the record, for anyone saying, "Oh, you're only saying that because he fumbled," I was saying it the moment that Tony Pollard got tackled. I was like, just QB sneak it. The tush push is so free. And Dallas has run it multiple times on the year, and it has worked. I think there was only one time that it didn't, and it was against Philly. So anyway, they should have just QB sneaked it. They don't. They turn it over on the one. That was one mistake. Then they just had some crucial penalties that allowed the Dolphins to keep some drives alive. They had some tackling issues at times. Just at the end of the day, Dallas just made too many mistakes. Now, at the end of the game, I was very impressed by the drive that they had to take the lead where Brandon Cooks got the touchdown, especially considering, some of the... It didn't really affect the drive, but like there was the holding penalty, defensive holding on Miami that didn't get called on CD, where like the dude basically was ripping his pants off. Like it was kind of wild. But then it got called the next play on when Kevontae Turpin got held. So like I said, it didn't fully affect the drive, but just like the mental fortitude to withstand some of those moments and not like crumble after it happens. Good on Dallas. Like I was super impressed by Dak that drive, because for anyone who didn't know, Tyron Smith was out this game, and I didn't think it was going to be as big of an issue as it was, because my expectation was that Tyler Smith would just go to left tackle. Instead, they kept him at left guard, and they put in the backup, who I can't remember his name, but it was unimportant because he was terrible. Like, it was so bad. There was multiple plays where he had the things where, like, you just got to slide out, and instead he, like, double teams the guy with Tyler Smith because I guess he got confused on blocking assignments. So Dak had multiple plays where a free rusher was coming in on him. I don't know. There was just a lot of issues, and yet Dak maintained composure, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns. I thought he played a great game. And so, yeah, ultimately just the mistakes kind of killed him in a tight one. I thought Miami played solid defense in the middle 2 quarters. But at the same time, I don't know. I just can't help but ignore some of the Mike McCarthy deficiencies. It felt like we had moments where we weren't like, the left side was clearly compromised and we weren't adjusting to that. And I don't know. It feels like at halftime I would have been like, all right, put Tyler Smith at left tackle. Forget the consistency and like, oh, you got to play left guard. For one game, for one half, we're just going to put you at tackle. You were amazing at it last year, and we'll throw somebody else in at left guard because like the tackle spot was absolutely compromised on the passing downs. And Tony Pollard and the run game are still largely irrelevant and inefficient. And when you watch Miami do all this stuff where they're chucking it to the outside, like their entire run game is between the sideline and the tackles. That feels like what Tony Pollard should be doing. That's what he was doing when Zeke was there, but instead everything is like between the tackles, and Tony Pollard's not very good at it, and they basically get nothing. And then CeeDee Lamb literally didn't have a single target in the second and third quarters. That's both on Dak and the play calling. Like, all right, like what I don't know. If I'm a coach, if I have like a couple of drives where Dak doesn't throw to him, I'm going to scheme up a play that he is the read, and it's easy to get him the ball. So I don't know. There was a lot of little complaints that I had about this game and little things that sort of built upon some of the deficiencies I've seen, even in some of our wins, but most notably our losses, like that San Francisco loss. That I'm sitting here saying, if this happens again, like basically what I'm saying is, I don't think there was like a blueprint, right, that they showed to beat us, but I do think that there was very clear issues that if these things pop up again in the playoffs, Dallas will lose, and we're going to point to all of it and be like, it happened against San Francisco, it happened against Miami, it happened against Buffalo, and it happened here again in the playoffs against whoever it is once again. So, yeah. I mean, it's not the worst loss because ultimately, out of all the 3 games Dallas had to play remaining, if there was one game they could lose and still win the division, if Philly is to lose another one, it had to be this one. But at the same time, it just considering how close they were, and just it felt like the loss against Philadelphia in Philadelphia, where you're so close and you just kept making minor mistakes. Like, come on, like at what point are we just we're gonna make those mistakes and overcome them?
Yeah. I did want to comment. I mean, I already did in our group chat on that last drive. That was a great drive. I mean, by Dallas and Dak and the offense, like you mentioned, despite some of the things that some of the self-inflicting wounds, but in regards to Dak, like once again, like I don't know why he got grouped into that game manager.
He played a hell of a game.
Like that last drive, like multiple times, and even Greg Olsen mentioned it like a couple times. Hey, made some tough throws where he had to stand in the pocket, take a shot, but he had to, like, I think it was one time he maybe not CD. Maybe it was one time he targeted him or it was another receiver, but it's like on out route for a first down. Just took the shot from the free
where he was literally getting tackled for about 2 seconds while he made the throw. Yeah.
On top of that, there's another multiple plays where he broke tackles from a blitzer and then extended the play, made a throw that once again majority of other quarterbacks are going to get sacked, and then your drive's pretty much done there. And even the throw at the end, just it was had to fit it in the window. Great catch, of course, by Cooks, but once again, great delivery by Dak and great read there. So. And then, unfortunately, defense couldn't hold through at the end of the day. Miami still had some creative juices, with a lot of, and you mentioned the motioning, like the one there's that one third down that Tyreek got because he like motioned back and forth. And I think they realized it was man, and then just threw like the little kind of set up like a screen per se for him. I'm sure you remember that, like 3rd and 3, and he got of course he got the first down because they set it up perfectly. And it's just so hard. But that goes to show, we talk about motion, how like motion is good, because I think some people don't realize that, like, hey, Seattle, take a look here. But because they saw in that one, I forget the corner that was kind of trailing him pre-snap. But obviously, hey, sometimes you're following Tyreek, he's fast, and when he went back to the left side, once again, I forget who, but they kind of slipped up, and that gave Tyreek just that's a little slip up. Gave Tyreek enough.
I think it was Jordan Lewis, but I could be wrong. He's 9. Our nickel corner.
Was it Curse, maybe?
Curse is number 1. Okay, I think it's Jordan Lewis. Right, I think he's number 9.
Okay, I'm gonna default to you. I'm sure you would know better. So yeah, regardless, it's tough.
He's number 2. Maybe it's Donovan Wilson. He's number 6.
Yeah, maybe. Once again, my memory my memory is not a lot of games, but regardless. Good win from gritty win from Miami. We haven't really seen that most of the time. They're kind of front running and just hold on, or so very rarely I think we've seen them, especially this year, construct a fourth quarter drive to a game winning drive basically. So check that off to a resume. And like I said, I don't put this a lot on Dak. Really, it's just like some people already are going to. It's just a tough loss for Dallas. They're still 10-5. They're still sitting pretty. And obviously we'll see going forward if they can bounce back. And like you said, maybe need some help. So need a lot of help to get the 1 seed. But hey,
Philly's got to lose. So
yeah. So we'll see if you can get the division. But critical win for the Dolphins there. Let's move on over. This one will be short and sweet. Neither of these teams are in playoff contention. The Bears, they handled their business against the Cardinals at home, 27-16. So basically, I think the main question is, John, do you think that I want to ask is Justin Fields, is this, as of right now, is his job safe, you think?
I don't fully think it is. Like, I mean, I don't think that he necessarily has done enough at the end of the season. Like, they're winning, but I mean, even his stat line here, 170 yards, touchdown, and a pick. I mean, he did have 97 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, so that's pretty big. But I still don't know if it's enough. I mean, there was a couple games earlier in Chicago's schedule too, because I mean, when you look at what they've done recently, like they've been looking really good. They have won 3 out of their last 4, 4 out of their last 6. So if they had beaten that Detroit team when they kind of choked it, they could be sitting at 7 and 8 here, and in that mix with all those 7 and 8 teams, that could be a wild card team. So like, Chicago's been close, and you got to wonder too, maybe if the Tyson Bagent stuff doesn't happen, where Justin Fields is healthy for some of those games, who knows? Because even some of those results are kind of close. But regardless, I don't think he's done enough. The only question mark for Chicago at this point, to me, if they're going to take a quarterback, is will they take Caleb Williams, because he's been doing a lot of social media stuff indicating he does not want to go there, liking different posts saying that he doesn't want to be there and they should take Marvin Harrison instead and all this kind of stuff. So he's very clearly shown a distaste for Chicago. So we'll see if that, I mean, maybe that buys Fields another year, but I kind of doubt it.
Yeah. Regardless, and like I said, we can get into this all day. We won't, at least not this podcast, maybe another one. Very interesting though, because both these teams, I'm starting to feel like less so for Arizona. They'll move on from Kyler. Feels like like you got to still build out the rest of the roster there. But yeah,
right.
But I wouldn't be shocked if the Bears do the same, because yeah, I mean, even this one you mentioned, it wasn't great passing wise. It's important to know DJ Moore knocked out for a bit for this game as well, so that hurts. And yeah, so who knows if they decide to keep investing in the offense, or if they make him change there at quarterback going forward or in the draft. But still got 2 more games Fields does to add to his resume for that, so we'll see. I'm sure Chicago too, keeping a close eye on that going forward. But good one. Good.
I mean, do you think he's done enough? Because I will say the fact that they're winning is, I mean, it makes it a little more like understandable if you're the Bears front office to be like, well, maybe if we do add a couple other pieces, we can, and Fields is healthy, maybe we could be a playoff team. I don't know. Do you think he's done enough?
I think he's done enough for another year. It's just tough because you mentioned the Caleb Williams stuff. So if you get him, he doesn't want to go there, then you're in this whole quandary of, man, we wasted the number 1 overall pick, because I'm assuming they're going to get that, on him. And then, as you always know, it's always harder to trade once you've made the pick. You're going to lose value, like no matter what.
Right.
I think they just kind of need to go. Yeah, I think I would agree. I think, or I would say, I think he's done enough for now. I think.
Because I mean, I like Justin Fields.
Yeah.
Like if they were to trade the pick, I'd like the move. I like building around him. I just don't know from their perspective.
I think that would be the move, or at least just build around him. Because like Cole Kmet, we've seen some bright spots for him. He's a good tight end. Obviously, we know DJ Moore is a playmaker, and I think really, hey, maybe you get another second. Maybe you get a Marvin Harrison, and man, this offense becomes real scary. The line's still a bit young. They're still filling that out, and we've seen the defense, at least at a later part of this year, kind of start to come together. The Montez Sweat trade, he's been playing really well for them. We know they have some solid pieces, and Brisker and their 2 linebackers that they brought in the offseason. And we'll see if they keep their cornerback, Jalen Johnson, right? I know he was disgruntled, but maybe. So it would be interesting to see. They'd have some good pieces. So I would lean more towards, Fields is still good. You never know, we just were seeing with Bryce Young, and I don't mean to heart but him. Like it's been a rough start. So I think you just keep building with what you got, and hey, maybe give him 1 more year. If it doesn't work out, they still have good assets where they could probably move into the next year's draft and maybe get a quarterback, or and you never know, maybe free agency too. A quarterback may be available. So
the interesting spot too is that they could trade back with a team like I don't know who the number 2 pick is right now, but like. I think it's Arizona, right? Arizona, and so the theory is that Arizona's probably not going to take a quarterback, so maybe they would even trade 2. But you could trade to like 3 or 4 and maybe still get Marvin Harrison. So I don't know. We'll see.
We'll have to see how it all shakes out for these two teams going forward, as they have some major questions and things and decisions to make going forward for their organizations. But let's move on over to the last but not least game on Sunday, the Sunday nighter. Although I feel like many were probably asleep or not watching this game, as it was the New England Patriots getting the win over the Denver Broncos, 26-23. What were your thoughts here, Don?
I don't really have a ton. I mean, for the Patriots, they're winning at a time when a lot of people feel they shouldn't be. So this could cost them, maybe the pick of the second quarterback off the board that they want. So that'll be interesting to see. The draft order is it's real confusing, especially with like we talked about with the Bears and the Cardinals. Who knows if they actually take QBs? To where for the Patriots, it feels like they're kind of locked in on taking one. So, I mean, they got the win, but I think the bigger story is obviously the Broncos and Russell Wilson stuff. I don't know if you saw today, they are benching Russell Wilson moving forward the rest of the season. And that is partially because of his contract stuff. Like, they can cut him after this year and they're going to have to eat a ton of money. But if they don't cut him this offseason, then it would guarantee even more money on his contract. So it's like, yeah, they have to eat like 95 million or whatever it is over the next couple of years. But if they don't cut him now, they have to pay him for next year and then still eat 95 later. So there's a whole lot of weird financial stuff there, but they're benching him so that he doesn't get hurt, because I guess that could make stuff just complicated. So anyway, yeah, the Broncos, I mean, they're kind of falling apart. It felt like they had sort of found their rhythm, found their stride, and now Sean Payton, it feels like every week we're getting a clip of him yelling at Russ on the sideline, which I do think Russ is maybe unfairly being pegged as the only problem, when we've seen many other teams, right, like the Colts in the past, where it feels like, oh, they're a quarterback away, when really maybe there's some larger issues at hand. But at the same time, considering how much Russ is getting paid, yeah, I mean, it has not really been good enough.
Yeah, and you mentioned that too, because I've been a little bit of a Russ critic, but even like, yeah, I a little boggle me, like, because in regards to the game, I mean, I know stat wise he looks great, and he technically threw an interception but got overturned. But for the most part, I mean, it's really on. I feel like the loss of this game in particular, I would put more on the team as a whole. I mean, you get a fumble first.
I mean, you let Bailey Zappi shred you.
They got a fumble off the bat, and they were literally after New England too. And like, New England's not a great offensive team. And you get greedy and try to go for on fourth down. You get stuffed at the 2-yard line.
Right.
And then so you give the Patriots the ball back, and then you play field position for a bit. So you lost opportunity there. Okay, granted, later on they still get ahead, but then they did have the fumble. That I guess Javonte Williams fumble, so that's tough. Once again, that's not on Russ, for being fair. Missed a field goal too at the end of the half that could have put them up 10-3. Some momentum going into the halftime. Then they come out, and then also there's the Marvin Mims where he muffed the kickoff. It led right to a touchdown for right after New England just scored a touchdown. So on top of, like, once again, just to reiterate, New England, as we all know, sucks at offense and is trouble scoring, and they just finally scored a touchdown, making it 16-7. You're like, okay, maybe it's manageable, but then 6 seconds later, oh man, it's 23-7 now, and Denver's, like we mentioned, is one of those teams that the game has to be close, like a Pittsburgh. They have to. And yeah, game got out of hand. They did score, make it competitive 23-all. And then, Patriots did enough to end that last drive and got the field goal. Like, so yeah, that was an odd move, but it makes sense, I guess, money wise. And yeah, it piques my curiosity, because we mentioned all these teams trying to get up to 1-2. Could Denver try to? I don't know. Like I said, I doubt they would, but it's Sean Payton. Apparently, he was after Mahomes the year he was coming out. So maybe Sean's got.
I wouldn't be surprised. I just wonder, like, where does that leave them in terms of like overall assets? Because it's gonna take a lot. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to be in a situation like Carolina, right, where like you traded and you got Bryce Young, but like, now how do you build around him?
It's the Will Smith meme where, okay, you got the guy, but then there's no one around him, so then
right,
you may ruin his career, or may sour his relationship with the front office, because first few years has been a struggle, and once he's had the rookie contract over, he bails, so who knows. But yeah, odd game, because like you mentioned, Patriots probably should be trying to lose that one, but hey, I think Bill Belichick, he's trying to get as many wins and buff that resume up maybe for his next team. But anyhow, that was
Also, I just want to say too, like Sean Payton, like it was kind of questionable why you specifically chose this job in the first place. So I don't know if you're kind of reaping what you sow. You know what I mean? Like if I was him, I would have waited for the Chargers job. That's all I'm saying.
I'd wait another year. But hey, he got jumping his opportunity. Maybe we'll see.
I don't even know if this is like tampering though. I would like I don't know if it's legal. I would have just like gone in the Chargers ownership and be like, look, if you fire Brandon Staley, I will take the job.
I don't know. Legally, I don't know.
Justin Herbert. I don't know if it's tampering, but if it's not, then do it. If it is, I'm sure there's some loophole that these guys know how to make backroom deals happen. So,
yeah, who knows? Could be collusion. I don't know how to cite it, but anyhow, let's move on over to the Monday/Christmas games. And sorry, ESPN decided to play an ad, so I had to mute that. Luckily, it didn't go through there. Anyway. Starting with the early game on Monday, it was the Chiefs and Raiders, and it was not the Christmas gift that many Chiefs fans, especially my family, wanted, as the Raiders get the win in Kansas City, 20-14. And I forget the stat, but wasn't it that Bailey Zappi did not complete not Bailey Zappi, Aiden O'Connell and the Raiders did not complete a pass in the second half, and they still won?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So, any thoughts here, John, in regards to this one?
I mean, really, it just comes down to self-inflicted wounds. Like we talked about this with some of these other teams, like Dallas, like Minnesota, where you just had some self-inflicted wounds. Kansas City, those two turnovers, and they were. I mean, one was returned for a touchdown, and the other one were they both touchdowns? Yeah, they were. So two defensive touchdowns. Yeah, and they were like, you're deep in your own territory when you like turn them over too. So it's just, if they don't do that, they win the game, like, and so Kansas City, their offense is bad right now. We've known this for a while. This is nothing new, but the turnovers are now even more of a problem. Like it just feels like their offense has just reached such a point of being bad too, because Pacheco got hurt in this game. He got ruled out, and so they had to go Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but he wasn't really doing much. I mean, he did have one big play, I think, on their touchdown drive, that one reception. But other than that, I mean, it just felt like this offense is just so bad that like even Travis Kelce wasn't really getting involved. The guy's throwing his helmet on the sideline. Andy Reid's having to talk to him. There's clips of Mahomes like, mouthing, just call an effing play. So maybe he's getting frustrated. I think that all this losing is just causing a lot of problems with Kansas City, and maybe they don't know how to handle it yet, because under the Mahomes era, they've been winning for so long. So this could be good for them in the future, but as of right now, yeah, I mean, nothing is new. We've known how bad their offense is. It's just, this was kind of the worst it's really been, because the offensive failure literally was the reason they lost, because they turned it over twice. That led to 2 touchdowns for the Raiders, and their offense for the Raiders, it wasn't that good. Even like Zamir White's stats with 145 yards, heavily inflated on a couple runs that were pretty big. So yeah, I don't know. It's reaching all-time lows for the Chiefs, and for the Raiders at 7-8, they could maybe push for a playoff spot. I'm not going to say they're going to make it, but they're in the mix. So we'll see. But yeah, for the Chiefs, really, really bad Christmas considering the way they lost.
Yeah, you mentioned the turnovers. Obviously, that of course is the biggest thing. I want to mention a little bit of the play calling too. Like, I think that's a big reason as to why these Chiefs aren't the same. We mentioned the fact, hey, they don't have really. Rashee Rice is a very good receiver. He's one of their sole bright spots, but he's not an explosive guy where he's more of a short to intermediate. I think we're seeing, and I think they're missing at least some sort of viable deep threat. I mentioned MVS. Not reliable, and he only had 1 target this game. Of course, everyone's going to point, they missed Tyreek Hill. Of course, they missed Tyreek Hill. I knew offense would. But I mean, and other guys that they've invested in to try to fill in that kind of speedster deep threat role, or at least be a playmaker. Sky Moore on IR, and then Kadarius Toney obviously out, and he hasn't had the greatest season, of course. So, yeah, that's a big thing. And another thing I want to mention too is like even the use of Travis Kelce. It just feels it is different under Matt Nagy as opposed to it was under Bieniemy. And I'm not sure if it's because Kelsey's got maybe starting to hit that decline that we've kind of been waiting for, at least athleticism wise, because I noticed a lot that you're just kind of having him like on the line, chip blocking, and then literally just going out to be an outlet, which I mean, it worked on the one touchdown drive for a bit, but once again, like it's Travis Kelce. Like I don't know, we've seen him
Yeah.
do. I'm not sure if that's a Nate. I feel like it's a Nagy thing because like I literally saw. I was pointing to my parents. I saw like 4 or 5 straight plays where like they just had Travis chip and like go and just flare out as like as a dump off. Like
Yeah.
that's what you're using Travis Kelce as. It's not like the Raiders were, and yeah, the Raiders did have attention towards him at times, but like yeah, I think that's it's one of the things I was harping on where I think they miss Eric Bieniemy, where he had not only better
Yeah.
ideas and probably a better, you know, strategizing. Because once again, I hate to pour on Matt Nagy, but one of the big concerns in Chicago was, man, he's great at creating these 2-3 yard plays, but he never does anything further. Never schemes up the deep shots or very good at that. So yeah, I don't know if that's something Andy Reid needs to start taking over himself or what. But yeah, gone are the days of the Chiefs just putting themselves in these holes and then getting out of them like we saw so many times. Yeah, I think it's and also too. Last point I want to note is they got a little greedy a couple times. It was they had a drive in the late third, early fourth that went down to the Raiders. They tried to go for it on downs on 4th and 7 at the 7 instead of taking the field goal. I'm just, it's one of those things where you're chasing for 7, but you could have probably settled for 3, and who knows how the game would have gone. But anyway, yeah, Sky not really falling for the Chiefs, but is a major concern, of course, going to the playoffs as their defense did their job. It's just now the offense, oddly enough, is the one that is kind of dropping the ball. And also no Jerick McKinnon, too, for a while. He's on IR as well. So it seems like any solutions they have are starting to run out. So we'll see if they can right the ship as they desperately need to these last few weeks, not just for positioning, but for the playoffs, because playoffs are for real in the AFC. So we'll see if Kansas City can do so. Let's go to a team that did technically right the ship with a win, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles. They beat the New York Giants 33-25. A little bit closer than it needed to be, and thanks Eagles, because some of us had y'all for the spread. But anyhow, your thoughts here, John, in regards to the Eagles getting a win against the Giants?
I mean, Devonta Smith after the game, his thoughts kind of said it all to me. He was like, "Yeah, I mean, we got the win, but I'm not happy." So ultimately, yeah, I really like it was the win was the most important part because if they lost this game and if they lose any game moving forward and they now tie Dallas, because it is against the Cardinals and Giants, that would actually give Dallas control of the tiebreakers due to NFC record and divisional record. So they cannot lose any of these games moving forward, even despite the fact that Dallas lost to Miami, who they beat. The common opponent thing comes after the divisional and conference records. So, yeah, they needed to win this one. I was obviously sitting there hoping the Giants would make the comeback. They didn't end up doing it. But Philly, I mean, their offense is also just not really that great. Like, sure, they scored 33 points. Jalen Hurts threw a pick 6. You can argue it's partially because his receiver tripped. So, I mean, there's that. But it just feels like they're not all on the same page. So we'll see if they can figure it out, if they can fix it. Because, sure, they beat the Giants, but you were kind of hoping that following 3 losses, that maybe you'd have a much more convincing win. Like I've said earlier, the win is really all that matters at this point in the season, but you want to try and build some momentum going into the playoffs and kind of clean up this little bit of a disconnect that their offense seems to have. And so maybe this win is kind of the first thing that can help them do that. But if they continue to play like this, I don't know if I can see them even making it maybe past the wild card round. So we'll certainly see.
Yeah, like even you mentioned the weird things. They had that one kick return where they ran into each other like off.
Yeah,
like that was odd. Like, yeah, those things because that literally led to that gave the Giants life because at that point it was 20-3, and then 2010 all of a sudden it's a ball game. And then Jalen Hurts pick 6. So yeah, it'd be interesting. I don't know much else to add. It'd be interesting to see, like you mentioned, if they can find that continuity or that balance on offense. Because the run game's still relatively simplistic, but hey, they have a really good offensive line, so it's still going to work, especially against a Giants team that doesn't have much to play for. And yeah, other note too, seems like maybe this is the end for the Tommy DeVito hype train. Well deserved by Tommy,
Yeah.
but there's a reason what you went undrafted, buddy. But hey, maybe he can be a staple backup, or for them or for another team. I would suspect for them, since he has the fans' love. So you gotta at least maybe have that for your backup. I don't know. We'll see what happens there for the Giants going forward. But yeah, for the Eagles, they take care of business here and gotta keep doing so going forward. And let's go last but not leastly to the final Monday night game, and it was the Baltimore Ravens getting the win over the San Francisco 49ers 33-19, despite some early mishaps by the referee tripping Lamar Jackson for the safety. It was looking like Ravens Nation was going to be real upset, but Ravens battle back here. John, what were your thoughts in regards to this game?
Well, I mean, when to start the game, the whole ref tripping Lamar Jackson or leading to the safety, I thought was ridiculous. I find it kind of crazy that a ref can he literally is the whole reason that the safety happened, because the only reason Lamar tried to throw the ball away is because he got tripped by the ref and knew that he would get tackled in the end zone, which would be a safety. Yeah. So he was trying to prevent it from happening, but obviously because he's falling, he couldn't make the throw. That said, and I also find it ridiculous that the refs then go and have the audacity to call it an intentional grounding. I feel like if that kind of stuff happens, that's one of those situations where you just kind of let the play go, as a ref.
Or rerun the down. Say it's referee interference.
Yeah, there's got to be something like that. My dad and I were talking about watching the game, and he was like, "Well, there's a lot of scenarios where stuff like that could happen. That it gets into some gray line." And I was like, "Yeah, I get that, but behind the line of scrimmage specifically, the fact that happens, I don't know. It's a little ridiculous." Anyway, but you want to talk about where I've mentioned this many times, even in reference to my own team. When you blame the refs, the answer, simply put, is always just play better the rest of the game, and it won't affect the game. And that's what happened here. The Baltimore Ravens did not allow that safety to be some crucial moment at the end of the game where we lost by 2, and if that didn't happen, blah, 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 we would have gone overtime, won the game, wah. They came out and they showed up and they played. Lamar had a heck of a game, almost 300 total yards, 2 touchdowns, and on the opposite side, Brock Purdy, 4 interceptions. And I think this has put Lamar probably as the favorite for the MVP. Brock Purdy is probably falling out pretty heavily because the best team they play all season, he doesn't show up. He does get injured and then cleared, but doesn't come back in the game. I'm not going to say he was necessarily benched, but just didn't go back out there. It wasn't a great day for him. So, I mean, for the Niners, I was a little surprised maybe they didn't run a lot more with McCaffrey. He had a monster day. It seems like they could have just maybe fed him the rock the whole game and really tried to rely on him. But at the same time, the score got out of hand a little bit early. At halftime, though, I don't know. It feels like they came out flat because Baltimore, they put up 17 on them in that third quarter, and the Niners put up 0. So overall, I mean, complete domination from Baltimore, in my opinion. I really felt like they showed that, hey, we are the better team as a whole. But for the Niners, I'm not worried. I mean, it is what it is. You got hit in the mouth. You learn from it. You come back next week and you try to get better and clean up those mistakes. I don't feel like there was necessarily anything Baltimore specifically did strategically that is oh my gosh, the Niners are so weak in this area. It was just simply put, Baltimore made plays, because even some of those picks, one was tipped at the line, that's not something that everybody can replicate. Or 2 were tipped at the line. Another one just hit off one. I will say one of Brock Purdy's interceptions was not fully his fault. I mean, he did throw to George Kittle in heavy coverage, but it hit off Kittle's shoulder, and then they pick it off. So like I said, these weren't some crazy schematical things that the Ravens were doing that it's whoa, they've completely figured out Shanahan. It was more so that the Ravens just came out and they made a lot of plays. So good on the Baltimore Ravens. That defense is for real. That team is for real. And we very well might see them now go on to secure the number 1 seed next week against the Miami Dolphins if they can win it. And if they do, I think it's going to be hard pressed to not see Lamar Jackson getting his second MVP trophy.
Yeah, I mean, he's deservedly so on that path. I want to mention in regards to the Niners offense, first interception, I think we can both agree on Purdy. Really, though, also just a great play by Kyle Hamilton, but really on Purdy too. It's one of those things where I think we saw a little bit of why arm strength matters. Because while Purdy has good enough arm strength, is one of the knocks against him coming out was he didn't have like very good, especially velocity on his throws. And against a Ravens team that loves to run zone, I think we saw, like you mentioned, with the Kittle one, but even a couple of the other, I forget the other one, but regardless, the other interceptions, I mean, like we mentioned, just tough. But yeah, I mean, the Niners, or not the Niners, the Ravens had a good feel, it seems like, for what the Niners are doing, and I mean, willing to bat balls down, do that, just disrupt the Niners' timing, and especially the first reads. Seemed like they did a very good job. You saw a lot of Brock Purdy patting the ball a little bit more than he's usually doing, and then having to escape out of dodge, and then that led to mostly bad things, as we saw. And yeah, I mean, also too, I think for the 49ers defense, had experience chasing Lamar around for a full game, and that's a whole experience in itself. It's not easy. I think it's why you see there's that large discrepancy in that record of Lamar versus the NFC, because you only play him once every 4 years, and yeah, he's an animal to contain. And even then, like we saw, he still was able to break off a couple of runs, and even then made some great passes. Him and Zay Flowers had a great connection, and even then found Isaiah Likely a couple times too. So yeah, I don't think the sky's falling for the Niners. They still got some of their guys involved, but yeah, it was just not their day. They met a team that was as physical as they were. It's very rare, but yeah, usually the Niners are the more physical team, the bullies. But and that's on me, as I should have known. Baltimore, they've always kind of been the original bullies. The past, really in the whole John Harbaugh era. So yeah, good on them, and especially their defense. I thought their defense would have issues, but as we saw, it was quite the opposite. Their defense was one of the sole reasons for them jumping out to this comfortable game and controlling it. So yeah, we'll see if they can handle another high-flying offense, very similar scheme to in Mike McDaniels, or maybe that might help Mike McDaniels, seeing what they did to San Francisco and what he can do to counter that going into their game next week. As you mentioned, it is extremely pivotal for that AFC standings. So yeah, great win.
And I do want to add too, that at least for Tua next week, like one thing that Baltimore I thought did really well is that it felt like they kind of flowed throughout the game and felt Brock Purdy's tendencies. Even like that first pick, he was targeting George Kittle, and you're talking about the arm strength and all these things. George Kittle was eating them alive that drive all the way down the field, and then boom, right in the end zone, they made the play. They were like, "You want to throw to Kittle again? Okay, like we'll step up and make a play this time." So, I mean, good on Baltimore, because their defense certainly it felt like they were like learning throughout the game of like, all right, you want to feed this guy? We'll try and take him away now. We're gonna show up when you want to make a big time throw, and you're not gonna make it.
So we'll see, how San Francisco responds going forward, because a couple guys got dinged up. Brock Purdy, of course, too, and also Trent Williams. So we'll see, because we know that they're usually dominant when they're fully healthy, but once a couple, chess pieces are off the board for them, they're a little more human. But yeah, for that is the reactions for week 16. Do you want to cut that off and do a separate for week 17 picks, or
up to you?
We'll cut it off here. So technically, for those listening at home, this is the cutoff for reactions, but we'll be doing our picks technically right now, but you'll be hearing it a little bit later. So as always, you can feel free to check that out, rate, review, subscribe, etc. I'll keep it short.